Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Wherever you are, welcome to Keys, our monthly broadcast to our clients around the world. We're delighted to have you with us today, where we tackle a topic which we are often feeling, sometimes talking about, but which can be hard to pin down. It's time to think about emotions all around the world. And to do that, I'm joined by a wonderful cast of colleagues from across Ipsos who are going to help us uncover their learnings on this important topic. So to kick off, we're going to start with Manuel, who's in New York today. He is going to be helping us think about how we measure emotions. He's the only member of our panel not called Gillian, so he's on first. We'll then move to Gillian, who's in Chicago. She's going to help us think through advertising and think through in particular how great advertising can stir our emotions and make that difference to your brand or your organization. And then we're going to fly to London, where Jill, for these purposes, is going to help us think through how marketers can be more empathetic in their work. I'm also in London today. I'm in the Ipsos office in the studio, and I'm going to just kick us off by thinking about public opinion right here, right now, and perhaps think a little bit about how we're feeling as a bit of an entree to the topics we're going to talk about today. Plenty of time for questions, by the way. Please put them in the little question box on your screens, and we've got a little bit of time at the end to ask the panel any questions you may have. And we'll also be making all of the material we're presenting to today available to you after the webinar. So that will be there for you to go back to should you wish to. So to kick off, I've been looking at public opinion. I've been thinking about how we're feeling, and I've been doing that through the lenses of 4 new reports that Ipsos has recently released, because we've been looking at love with our Valentine's Day survey. We've been looking at worries with our What Worries the World study. We've been looking at society with our populism study, but we've also been thinking about business and of course emotions come into play at work as well as at home, and that's important perhaps just to think about how it feels from the boardroom perspective. But before I do that, I'll start with love. It was of course Valentine's Day just 2 weeks ago, and we did a study, as we do every year, to look at how people feel around the world, and we found that 74% of people across 31 countries say they feel loved, 62% happy with their romantic life. But the minute you start to think about those 31 countries, the minute it reminds us of perhaps just how complex this question of how we measure people's feelings are, because if I'm thinking about this concept of feeling loved, big differences by countries. Now, my instant takeaway, if I were a journalist, might be to write about how Colombians are far more loved than Japanese people. But probably my researcher's eye means I need to think a little bit more perhaps about what the phrase means, what it means in different languages, and setting it against the broader context and culture. And Manuel's going to help us think that through in a little bit more detail in just a moment. If I'm thinking about worries, well, those of you who are with us on previous Keys webinars will know that each month we check in to see what worries the world. We ask people to tell us what are the main things that worry you at the moment in your country. The headline from this week's release is that inflation is still top after 23 successive months. But that's not always been the case. It's 4 years now since the World Health Organization declared COVID to be a global pandemic. We, of course, hadn't got pandemics in our questionnaire in 2020. We had to add it pretty promptly. It came in at 63%. It stayed top for at least a couple of years, but now it isn't part of let's say the environment when we're looking at public opinion. But certainly, had we been thinking about emotions around the world 3 or 4 years ago, we would be thinking about those experiences, which we can all, I'm sure, recall in unpleasant technicolor. What we also find is that some things, poverty, crime, corruption, unemployment or employment, don't change in terms of being very regularly up at the top of people's list. Am I safe? Do I have a home? Do I have a job? So those things tend to be more constant. Other things like cost of living pressures, certainly in a number of countries around the world. It really was a shock to governments, to people, and indeed to businesses to have to adapt to an environment which suddenly had rising prices as a big topic. And it affects, of course, how we feel and what we can buy and what our sentiments are. Talking of our sentiments, perhaps the most remarkable study we've done on society in recent weeks is our new populism study. 28 countries trying to look into this topic in a bit of detail, because of course this year is a year when we're going to see more than 50 elections around the world. On the chart we have just 6 of them that we're going to be looking at this year. On the chart you'll see the broken system index, and I'm sorry for the drama, but it does feel quite dramatic to look at these questions and these numbers. These are based on 5 questions, and you'll see consistency across these very different, on the face of it, countries. Those 5 questions include the economy being rigged to advantage the rich and powerful, people, politicians I should say, not caring about people like me, and our country needs a strong leader to take us back from the rich and powerful. So all of those have around 2 in 3 people around the world saying yes. We have many experts perhaps on this call. Certainly Manuel will show his expertise in a moment. Well, they don't understand the needs of people like me, say the global public. And very strikingly, 1 in 2 saying to fix our country, we need a strong leader who's willing to break the rules, and perhaps break the news as well. So that question on our society being broken, I mean, it really is quite a strong feeling to have that, having majorities in 21 of 28 countries saying, yes, that is the case. And so, as I mentioned, all of the detailed resources that we're presenting on today are available for you to explore in more detail. Some of you might want to look at 1 or more countries that you're interested in there. We have trend data over time, but certainly feels a really important study. But also, with thinking about emotions as we are today, there's something not quite right in my society where I am. Maybe there's some things that brands and organisations can do to perhaps help people feel a little bit less not all right. We'll come back to that later, I'm sure. On the business point of view, we've got a study called the Reputation Council, and I always enjoy looking at the findings of this study because it's a little bit different. We're not now asking the general public, we're asking senior communications people, senior corporate communications people, what they think. So they're working in big organizations. They can see in some ways that overall landscape of their business that they're part of, and always a really useful counterpoint to what, for example, the general public might be telling us. And what the chief communications officers are telling us is that geopolitical uncertainty is very much something that keeps them awake at night, but also building on the study on populism, really thinking through what political polarization means, what cultural wars mean for their organization. On fake news, for example, fake news and disinformation pose a material threat to our business. 74% of these senior communications people are agreeing with that, and it's 10 points up on the same point last year. So real marker there, let's say in the boardroom, about how they respond and develop appropriate responses to the broader communications environment that they're working in. Now, AI is another thing that's starting to keep them awake at night. When we do general public research, one of the big features that we found is this sense both of the wonder of what AI can bring us, particularly, for example, in potential for healthcare. I think the general public already get that this could be really beneficial, but the general public also have some worries about what it means, whether it's for our security or whether it's for disinformation to permeate more than it already is. Interestingly, we see particular nervousness in the so-called Anglosphere, or the more English-speaking countries, I should say, and that's something which is something we'll be tracking this year. Coming back to my communications officers, they've also got the wonder and the worry of AI. They're telling us already they think it's going to fundamentally transform the way that businesses operate, perhaps creating both the sense of opportunity and uncertainty in businesses around the world. We're going through a change curve. Not that many of the corporate communicators at this stage are using it meaningfully in their day-to-day job. My hunch is it might be a slightly higher proportion for our clients on the call today, but just 24% of them are using it at the moment. But they are starting to worry, and one of the things they're worried about is the ethical policies that they have in place, and this consensus essentially that what they have at the moment in place is not what they're going to need to have in place tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. So that's my quick overview of some of the key messages we're getting from public opinion right here, right now. Some stability, some uncertainty, some dissatisfaction with how things are going. And it feels perhaps a moment then for me to now hand over to Manuel, who's going to help us think through our topic of the day a little bit more, this topic of emotions, this topic of how to measure emotions. And Manuel, thank you for being with us to take us deeper into this important territory. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Simon, and welcome everyone. I'm Manuel Garcia, and today we will be serving a feast of knowledge about emotions around the world. So let's get started. First of all, let's talk about what are emotions, because we tend to think that everyone has the same understanding around the world, but we actually do not. So in academic research, we think about emotion as these physiological changes, the changes in our body that happen in response to the environment. So that's important to keep in mind, because that means that emotions are not something that happens in one moment when I see the person I'm in love with, but actually we are always at some emotional state, because we're always responding to the environment. But emotions are actually complex. Let's think about emotions like a gourmet meal, in which each dish we cook it up in our minds with different ingredients. We have our thoughts, we have these physical sensations, this body sensations, and our perception of the world around us. And the final flavor is that emotion that we end up feeling. But there's one very critical element on how we understand those emotions, and that is our upbringing, our culture, and our language. So all of our previous experience, our past. So let's think about it like spicy food, right? So you eat that hot pepper and you get this burning sensation in your mouth, and that's a burning sensation for everybody, sort of like regardless of your upbringing. But that burning sensation will be interpreted by someone in Mexico like something delicious, but maybe someone in Poland will interpret that as pretty much going through hell. So just like that, the way we interpret these body changes, these physical sensations, as either joy or like fear or like sadness, this is very heavily impacted by our upbringing and also by our language. Even like probably many of you here in this global audience, you're familiar with like different words like the ones we have here, gezellig, schadenfreude, dadiri, that exist in some languages, perhaps in yours, but that you cannot quite translate, that you cannot find an exact translation. You can try to explain it, but there's no exact translation to it. But even when we think about emotions that were always understood as universal, like fear and anger, they are not quite that universal. So these cultural differences add a lot of complexity to the task of measuring emotions. But however, here are the good news. Even if all of these emotions across different languages, across different cultures, differ because we all have different upbringings, they can all be explained on 3 dimensions, which are indeed universals. So we can explain things on valence, arousal, and control. And what does it mean? So valence is whether it's positive or negative. I can explain in every culture and context and language whether the emotion and feeling is more positive or more negative. Arousal is the intensity of the emotion, so I can explain whether what I'm feeling is more intense or more weak, or I'm more calm. And then control is whether I feel like I'm in control of the situation or that the situation is out of my control. So these three dimensions are indeed universal: valence, arousal, and control. And all of these words we use to express our emotions in different contexts, in different languages, they can be explained on these three axes. So with this approach, we can actually compare across culture. We can actually do a lot of things to measure emotion and to actually better understand how people are feeling. So with that in mind, we developed a research approach to measure emotion based on this. This is called constructivism. This has been studied in academic literature for decades. So we tested this approach across several markets on a set of images like those on the screen that that we got in our proprietary Ipsos database of images, which was created to evoke emotions across this whole spectrum of valence, arousal, and control. And they've been validated to physiological responses. So we conducted this research across 6 countries: the US, France, Mexico, Brazil, China, and Saudi Arabia. And we have also conducted foundational work on this in Turkey, Germany, and Italy, and of course, more to come. So a lot of interesting things that we saw on this. Here, first, I'm going to show a snapshot of our study. We've seen that the way we rate our emotions obviously can differ a lot depending on cultural language. We see there's more consistency on valence. With this, we are generating a cross-cultural database of emotions so that it can be compared based on these universal dimensions. And here we can see that some of them show some similar distribution, which is great. But then when we look closer at the data, we can find very interesting differences. So here, we're looking at data from the US and from Saudi Arabia. And let's focus on one emotion that's probably the most widely understood as universal emotion, which is happy, which is the word happy for happiness. So that's in Arabic is Zaid. So here we have it translated in English to make it easier. So you can see there that happy is as positive in English as it is in Arabic. So the valence is the same. But however, when we look at arousal, happy in Arabic is 20 points more intense than it is happy in English. So even for something that universally thought that is universal, that we all mean the same, we are not meaning the same when we say happy in the US and in Saudi Arabia. Some more interesting data or insights that we found looking at this data is that, of course, culture add a unique flavor to the emotions perceived and felt by the people, and the same stimulus can evoke very different emotional responses in different cultures. Like you can see here, the emotional responses to a picture of a graveyard in China, France, and the US. You can see that in China, it leans more towards the negative, being from more intense to more calm. But the US, it leans more calm, like lower arousal, either positive or negative. And then France shows a wider distribution. So this is all really cool and very interesting. And you might be wondering, how can this approach, however, help my business? So let's get into that. So with this approach, that as you can see is very simple, but with a lot of rigor and research behind, we can analyze consumer reactions to different types of stimuli, that being products, ads, branding, you name it. And by analyzing those emotional responses, businesses can gain deeper insights on what works and what doesn't work within the marketing efforts, and therefore make decisions to improve customer engagement, to lever those emotional drivers. So here, for instance, we can compare the emotions elicited by different stimuli, and see what are the feelings that it leaves in people's minds. So what creative, what pack, what product is perceived or elicits a more positive emotion, a more arousing emotion, but also like more just concrete, more joy, more comfort, or more frustration. We can also, of course, map those emotions to these universal dimensions, so we know what they really mean. But then something that's really, really cool is exploring which are the concrete emotions, and they're generated by the user in the cultural language, that drive business success, and explore which are the emotions that lead to brand rejection. So we understand which are the emotions we want to elicit and which are the emotional levers that we want to pull. Then ultimately, something else that we've done by means of our Ipsos Vision network is creating an ecosystem of emotions to understand which ones generate other in a given context. So something that we saw interestingly in this chart is that while positive emotions lead to positive emotions and negative emotions lead to negative emotions, we found some bridge emotions like empathy that can make a connection between the positive and the negative. And you will see that both my friend Jillian's will explain later how empathy is very key for connection. So that was a quick taste of this gourmet approach to understanding emotions. If you want to learn more, of course, do not hesitate to reach out, and you can visit our Ipsos Views, Emotions Around the World, listen to the podcast. That's very entertaining and very short, or be in the lookout for our article at the Fox Business Review. I've got a feeling, a framework for how businesses can measure, understand, and leverage consumer emotions. So with that, thank you guys, and back to you, Simon.
Well, thank you, Mamal, for this guided tour. And your "I've got a feeling" thing makes me wish we had the Keys soundtrack to keep us going onto the next presentation. So I'll stay just talking just for now. And a couple of things from our viewers, actually. We have a viewer from Poland who sent us a smiley face, because we're all about emotions, and says, "Hey, I'm from Poland and I love all this hot chili type food." So we'll rethink that slide next time we present that one.
We're not all the same.
We've also got people enjoying your slide on words that are hard to translate. We've got questions around spelling of different words, and they're very interesting as I guess a native English speaker, but Schadenfreude being one word which just we can't translate. It's just we've just taken it from the German. And so as we say in English, it's c'est la vie, I think. But really interesting overview, all in here. If we're being very insistent with you, what's our one key takeaway that we should take away from your research?
I think something that this research makes very clear is that when in our research practice, but also in our life, it is very important to understand that people are wired differently, that even something as simple and commonly understood as the word happy doesn't mean the same probably for you, Simon, that grew up in the UK, or for me that grew up in Spain and spent a big part of my life in the US, so let alone someone in further places, right? So I think the key element here is empathy. I think that's critical for our human interaction, but also for our research practice to better understand societies, markets, and people, our consumers, and of course to have really rigorous research to actually properly understand people and not make assumptions also based on our subjective perception of the world.
Lovely. Well, that point about us being wired differently is a brilliant setup actually for our next presentation, because Gillian is an expert in advertising research, and of course advertisers, Gillian, are trying to communicate with huge numbers of people, each of them wired differently. So tell us a little bit more about how emotions can really cut through in advertising. Thank you for being with us.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me. So yes, hi everyone. I'm Jillian Rice, and I'm a VP in creative excellence, where we help our clients understand their advertising and how to communicate directly with their consumers. And today we're going to explore the role of emotions in advertising through those learnings that we have on creative effectiveness, or what we call misfits creative, and how we can trigger those emotions. Through our global meta-analysis of our ad testing database, we have found that the most effective ads are those that are both high on components of creativity as well as empathy. In fact, when both of these constructs are present, we see a 20% stronger performance than average, whereas advertising that does one of these things without the other tends to regress more to the mean. These highly effective ads are what we call misfits creative. But what does this really mean? As my colleague Adam Sheridan expressed in his books titled Misfits, effective advertising is made up of 3 key components. The first is a creative experience for the audience, one that is unique, drives that emotional response, entertains them, or maybe even surprises the viewer. This creative experience often drives a visceral or emotional connection to the creative to aid in its ability to be remembered. The next component of creativity is creative ideas, and these are things that shed a new light on the brand or help consumers to differentiate it from a competitor in the category, or maybe even share some new information about the brand or product being advertised. This really shapes people's expectations. But lastly, and perhaps most importantly, is empathy, or when and how the ad relates to people in a meaningful way. This is really the uniting force that helps to build Misfits Creative by taking what we say about the brand and how we do it creatively and bringing it to the consumer in a way that is important and meaningful to them. So how can advertisers get to this Misfit Creative? At Ipsos, we offer our clients kind of tools and ways to evaluate their advertising at any stage in the development journey. And as a continuation of this Misfits meta-analysis, we wanted to uncover where and how best to identify and deliver these components of empathy and creativity. And what we learned is that empathy, that most impactful component of effective creative advertising, best finds its source early in the creative development journey. So we're now going to look at a case study of empathy in action. And this was that we're going to watch a final ad here, but this is something that we used and measured in our instant labs methodology. So that early stage when it was really more just an idea. I will mention the ad is in French, and my French is not great. So we're going to go ahead and play it kind of silently, and I'll just do my best to voice over and translate in English so you can kind of follow along. What is fusion? It's a mix of contrasts that gives birth to something new and unique, just like you. Who? Me? Yes. You are the fusion of all your dreams you pursue, of all of the fears you face, and all the adventures you live. Fusion is what makes us into what we are. And what if we could capture fusion in a bottle and take a sip of tasty fusion of tea, fruits, and herbs? Fused tea, made of fusion. So to differentiate itself in a fairly generic category, Fused Tea needed to find a way to turn its brand name into an asset that is meaningful to consumers so they can find a new reason to choose it. The team found a way to communicate what fusion is and what it can bring to our lives. It's not just about addition of things, but a synergistic combination. And this is really best illustrated by showing what people really are and what makes us unique. Fusion is something that is at the heart of our identity and what makes us who we are. The DNA of our parents, the influences and aspirations and things that motivated us as children when we grew up, and the experiences that we go through all shape us. By redefining fusion as an inspirational emotional benefit to consumers, it lends the brand Fused Tea to be unique and different from others, giving a new reason to explain why it offers a better drinking experience with that fusion in a bottle. We don't just help our clients at an early stage, however. We wanted to share some recent findings from our latest Super Bowl ad awards. So, of course, the Super Bowl, very big event here in the US, and wanted to highlight some of the advertising from the event and kind of why it was such a strong performer. And so we'll take a look at those ads here now and then talk about them for a few minutes.
Judge Beauty is back.
Beauty fades.
Dumb is forever.
His boss was overspending on beauty.
She is wasting company funds.
$92 on foundation? I just wanted to look glowy.
That stuff isn't even cruelty-free.
I find you guilty and sentence you to $14 glowy skin.
Your Honor, in my humble opinion, that is more of a reward.
And my humble opinion, you're a putz.
Okay.
Judge Beauty serves eyes, lips, facts.
In Elf we trust.
This is Pluto TV country. Here on this farm, we grow couch potatoes. Couch potatoes grow big and strong here, fed with the finest content from Pluto TV. Thousands of TV shows and movies for free.
You just open the app, something great will be on.
I love Star Trek.
I love romance, but I also love murder. I like romantic murders.
SpongeBob SquarePants.
Cats 24/7 channel.
I love Ink Master.
Pluto TV just gets me.
I like anything where a hot person throws a glass of wine at another hot person.
Well, this country was raised on TV. TV that was easy. TV that was free. Pluto TV is TV the way it's supposed to be.
So some quite fun ads there, if I do say so myself. So let's talk about them a little bit together. This first example for ELF Beauty is a great one because it has a lot of the components that we think about when we talk about creativity. It's something that's funny, that's buzzworthy on the surface to aid in that kind of attention and memorability. And it also meets the cultural moment where the TV series Suits in the US is having a little bit of a resurgence. So something in there for fans of the series as well to meet that cultural moment. But all of that stuff, that creativity on the surface is really pushed over the top because of that empathetic root in the messaging here. This ad actually addresses a real consumer tension around wanting to achieve glowy skin, but feeling overwhelmed and daunted by the amount of expensive products that we supposedly need to achieve that glowy skin. Whereas Elf can meet us and kind of fit any budget with $14 glowy skin. So this is a great example of kind of Misfits creative that was really effective as we saw. The next example for Pluto TV couch potatoes, which admittedly was one of my favorite ads of the Super Bowl this year, is another great example of Misfits creative. This breaks convention of what we might typically see from streaming advertisers. It takes us to an unexpected place to watch TV, the middle of a potato farm. And it's a calculated but humorous risk by poking fun at people who love to just binge watch TV. But again, the creativity here isn't without empathy, as the brand does a great job trying to offer a massive library of content, but to the end benefit of the viewer. TV and streaming has gotten complicated and expensive and littered with choices, but with Pluto TV, you can just turn it on and sit down like a couch potato. So while emotion is important throughout the creative development journey, the Misfits way is really about identifying that empathetic insight early on, as this will help guide creative to success throughout the rest of the development process. By identifying what resonates with consumers early, marketers and agencies can move through the later stages of creative development with confidence, knowing that their ideas are backed with that critical connection with consumers, creating more space for more actionable fine-tuning to ensure the created lands your core objectives and triggers those desired emotions in the way that you intend. So as we close here, if you're interested in learning more about the Misfits way to creativity or about our Super Bowl ad awards, we invite you to visit the websites here, or you can reach out to your local creative excellence team.
Thank you so much, Gillian, for that expert tutorial on what can really cut through. And I'm sure many of us on the call, whether we're based in the States or elsewhere, love the Super Bowl. For those of us who are based elsewhere, clearly it feels very American. To what extent are the Super Bowl ads transferable to other countries, would you say?
It's a great question. And I think the sad reality is probably not very much. The reality is that, you know, as Manuel demonstrated, the way that emotions are felt and experienced in different countries is very different. And the creative for the Super Bowl is typically very empathetic because it is designed for that kind of American consumer. So while we may see signs or ads that can transfer, and they certainly do, I wouldn't assume that the success rate would be very high for some of those reasons.
Very good. Well, I would say that the one about Caps TV has cut through to me because I'd quite like to sit down and have a look at that later on. But we'll come back to you later with some more questions. But thank you for that for now. It brings us on to Gillian, who is going to help us think through how marketeers can bring some of this information and evidence together and be that little bit more empathetic. Jill, take it away.
Thank you, Simon. It's lovely to be here today with everyone on the call and sharing the screen with such esteemed colleagues. So today I thought I would actually start with what empathetic marketing is not. When it comes to brands, empathetic marketing is not another kind of marketing such as performance marketing or digital marketing or content marketing or relationship marketing or any other kind that you can think of. Rather, it's a mindset. It's a mindset that marketers can bring to all their marketing efforts. The empathetic marketing mindset is the golden web that connects all brand marketing efforts. It's a mindset that equips marketers with the ability to understand people, what is important to us, and how their brands can positively contribute to our lives. Now, to have an empathetic marketing mindset, it is necessary to understand what empathy is. Well, empathy is not only an emotion, it is also a trait and a skill. And what this trait, this skill makes space for in the marketing realm is connection. Connection with people through understanding different perspectives, shared emotions, felt compassion. And to build this golden web of connection with people, marketers should understand what is important to people, share in the needs and want the best for people, and then take brand actions that strive to make people's lives better. An empathetic marketing mindset means marketers get a deeper understanding of people and can therefore better act on that understanding to deliver against and shape what people want, need, and expect from the brand through the products and services it offers, the messages it broadcasts, as Gillian beautifully demonstrated for us earlier. While this is an invitation to marketers to adopt an empathetic marketing mindset, it comes with a caution, because what is worse than not adopting an empathetic marketing mindset? Well, not being genuine, faking it. It's worse to pay lip service to an empathetic marketing mindset than to not adopt the mindset at all. If the brand actions related to empathy are not genuine, people will know and brands will be caught out. So how then do marketers know if and how their genuine golden web of empathy is shining through, being noticed by people, being received by people, and positively shaping their brand expectations? Well, a brand's equity is one way, and brand desire is the Ipsos measure of equity, and it represents the sum of all positive expectations a person has of a brand. So brand desire is calculated. It's a fusion of our own, if you will, of two dimensions, a functional dimension and an emotional dimension. Brand performance is the functional dimension question, and brand closeness is the question that captures the emotional dimension. Brands want to grow their equity, must meet the functional expectations people have of their brand, and nurture emotional connections. Now, thanks to the data from our extensive Ipsos brand database, we can see how the average ratings for two questions that capture the functional and emotional dimensions of brand desire have increased over time. And it is the sharp and steady increase in the average closeness that is causing the gap between the two dimensions to narrow dramatically. This trend clearly highlights a shift in how people are connecting with brands, and that brands are building and nurturing those emotional connections. It also suggests that emotional connection is playing a more and more prominent role for people, and Manuel shared just how varied those positive emotions can be. So let's make this a little more tangible with an example from the US cookies market. In this real data, Oreo is a dominant brand in the market, and with a brand desire of 20, it has the strongest brand equity in the market. Data Crunch Munch, which I'm sure you can guess, is not the brand's actual name. The data is real, the brand name is not. But Data Crunch Munch is well behind with a brand desire of 11. What is it then that gives Oreo such an extensive lead in the market? We can understand the brand desire scores by looking at the functional and emotional dimensions that go into them. The two brands are very similar on brand performance. The functional dimension, while brand closeness, the emotional dimension, is higher for Oreo than Data Crunch Munch. So is the emotional connection people feel for Oreo that is giving them their brand equity edge? Now, I'm sure we all know, we just have to think of ourselves, that it is possible for people to love more than one brand at the same time. But what a brand really needs is to be the only love. We are able to determine if people share these feelings for a brand with other brands, or if they save their positive emotions for only one brand. So let's turn again to Oreo and Data Crunch Munch. Is the emotional connection people have with Oreo strong enough for the brand to make sparks fly? Well, we see that for 21% of the people surveyed, Oreo is their one and only. For these people, their positive cookie emotions are reserved for Oreo alone. Only 5% of people have Data Crunch Munch as their one and only. The majority of people who buy this brand are sharing their biscuit love with more than 3 other brands. This tells us that being better at connecting emotionally with people than competitors can give brands an edge. Nurturing this emotional connection with an empathetic marketing mindset can help marketers positively shape brand expectations and build strong brand desire. Now, this does seem to imply that if a person loves a brand so much, they will choose to buy it more than any other brand. But people want and need, people's wants and needs can change depending on what's happening in their worlds and their lives around them at any given moment. Now, if needs and wants are different in different contexts, then it follows that people will also make different brand choices. So diving back into our Ipsos brand database, we see that people have spend 7 times more on the brands that they have a strong relationship with compared to the ones that they have a weaker relationship with. And we know, thanks to the strong correlations with actual market share, that brand desire accurately represents what happens in the real world. So by shaping and meeting functional and increasingly more important emotional expectations, building that strong brand desire and building it across different contexts means your brand is more likely to be chosen more often. So it's evident that an empathetic marketing mindset is good for business. It fosters meaningful connections and supports brand choice. And an empathetic marketing mindset serves both the brand and its customers. But we heard earlier from Simon how people are worried as we navigate these economically difficult times. So there is a vulnerability, a risk for people when choosing to spend money with a brand, no matter whether their relationship with the brand is strong and singular or not. This willingness to be open to a brand is what people bring to the two-way street of empathy. And it's important for marketers to remember this as they build those powerful connections with an empathetic marketing mindset and appeal to the role that emotions play for the people that their brands strive to serve. So thank you. And back to you, Simon.
Well, thank you, Jillian, for sharing us those perspectives on how we can kind of put those building blocks together. And to keep that metaphor going, the two-way street was felt like a really interesting concept. I can imagine that maybe varying from circumstance to circumstance. Perhaps you could say a word or two more about that, empathy being a two-way street.
Yes, it's an interesting one to explore more for sure. We said, I said empathy is about having a deep understanding of people and taking action to make their lives better. This is what we believe marketers should do for brand success. So while acting with empathy, which is what marketers and brands do, is not dependent on people receiving it, we should act with empathy regardless. However, the hoped for consequence, what we hope people will get, is that they will choose and buy their brand. So when this happens, when people do choose to buy a brand, people bring with them their expectations that the brand will deliver, and they are giving up some of their hard-earned, often limited financial resource. And this is people offering their vulnerability. This is people being open in this two-way street of empathy.
Lovely, and thank you for that. And talking about brands, we must congratulate you on the creation of that new brand for clients on the call. Gillian put into our AI machine, can you give us a brand that would suit our global audience for our webinar on market research? Hence Data Munch Crunch. So that's where that came from, and clearly I already quite fancy one. But anyway, we'll move on, and I'm going to move back to you, Manuel, because lots of interest in your research and the cross-country elements that you talked about, and in particular, one of the questions, an interesting one, is this sense of conscious that some things maybe apply more to different cultures or countries, but are there any of these emotions that you really are saying cut through across cultures, particularly for us if we're thinking about our brands? What should we really looking out for in terms of success?
So you know what, I think we need to do research to find out. We have done some research across countries, but I would not want to just speak out of my subjective perception, but we would need to conduct some research on that.
Very good. And remind us of the countries you've covered include, we had a question around whether you've got UK's data, you've got some UK data, you've got a whole range of countries to start us off in that quest, haven't you?
We did some research in the UK, I think with Gillian, correct?
Yeah. Well, you have Brazil, I think, as well. So there are many countries for us to start off with as we think through the different dynamics. Gillian in Chicago, rather than Gillian in London, I think this question about the US advertising context, I think has got people thinking, and in particular, the question, I know the Super Bowl ones are often, you're trying to get this huge audience, aren't you, because so many people are watching all at once. But any observations on how advertisers are communicating well with particular audiences, perhaps particular ethnic groups or particular age groups? Are there any lessons from your work for more targeted audiences away from the Super Bowl?
Yeah, that's a great question, and agree that the Super Bowl audience is interesting from a global perspective because it seems so consistent in that it's Americans, right? But the reality is that we are a melting pot. So there are a lot of layers of diversity and culture kind of baked into what makes an American American. So I would say, to answer the question, there really are kind of different strategies or ways in to be empathetic with, let's say, a Gen Z versus a Hispanic consumer, right? There are certainly things that most consumers or most people can relate to at a certain level. But yeah, I think we are seeing, this kind of more micro-targeting trend happening where we're really trying to get messages right for specific pockets or groups of consumers within the US, because we know there are so many layers of culture and context to kind of unpack in the US in particular, which I think makes it a really exciting market to do this research in, because we're constantly learning new things about different audiences.
Lovely, thank you for that. And actually, just to pick up on that, I'm going to come back to Gillian in London, actually. So we're just hearing about different target groups and different cultures. What about different categories or different sectors, Gillian? I mean, we were looking at snack foods, weren't we? But are there any lessons from other sectors like technology or finance that you could share with us to help us be that little bit more in the empathetic mindset?
Yeah, so I think empathy is cross-category, isn't it? It just like it's cross-cultural. And I think no matter what category you're in, I think it is about understanding your consumers or the people who you want to be your consumers and putting yourself in their shoes and getting to grips with what it is that their day-to-day reality is. So in the financial sector, for example, we saw all those things that worry everybody in the world at the moment that you shared, Simon, and inflation is right at the top. And so in a financial sector, then it is about thinking, okay, this is a service we offer. How do we understand the lived reality that people are going through right now? How, in terms of how they're managing their money, how they're spending their money, how they're saving it if they're able to save, and really getting to grips with understanding the different contexts people find themselves in, so that you're able to act with empathy. And I think in terms of being able to measure that, absolutely, you know, across category, the measurement is there too. So I think we have all the building blocks.
Yes. So, well, this point, I mean, this is really what we wanted to get into today, was this questions around measurement, and our next question is actually leads on from that to Manuel, because you've been sharing with us some examples of how people describe their emotions, but we're conscious and that, you know, you can also measure them in different ways. So where do those things, like when you're attaching things to people's arms and things like that, come into play in terms of measuring emotions these days?
So I think that's a very interesting question, Simon, because as we said, like, emotions are complex, so there are like different aspects to that. So now let's think of, on one side, the physiological changes in our body, and in the other side, how we interpret that. So how I interpret that, that's very insightful. Like, if I'm frustrated with a particular user experience, that's important to capture. You don't want to miss that. And then the changes on your body, when we talk about the dimensions, which are universal, like the physiological changes are also universal, we do find a lot more consistency on how people rate their experience in valence, arousal, and control. And in fact, some of these dimensions have been validated back to physiological signals. Like, for instance, arousal correlates with galvanic skin response and has been validated in the literature, but also with our database, with our own data and our own research. But then where do they come in? There are like moments in which different tools are very insightful. So for instance, the level of granularity that EEG or GSR gives you on, I'm feeling this level of arousal in this particular 2 seconds of this moment, that's something that you cannot report, like moment by moment, how are you feeling? So that's where it's very insightful. Like, eye tracking, you cannot report moment by moment where you're looking at. And then like response time, or like now we are working a lot with a tool that we call decision process tracing, that's tracing the tracking, measuring the trace of a decision that provides information about cognitive conflict, and you cannot express how conflicted you are at some point. So there are moments where these tools are adding value on things that you cannot express. But the way we approach emotion with this framework, which is self-reported, it's absolutely insightful and providing a lot of information that can help make decisions.
Yeah, well, I think we're all in search of this sort of, this special source that can really drive that success or make us stand out from data munch crunch, for example. And perhaps that brings us to possibly a topic for a future webinar, may well be the attention deficit, how we can capture people's attention. And that perhaps brings us to our final question for Gillian. We've just got 1 minute left, question about adverts. One of the clients on the call was watching one of the Super Bowl ads. They watched the longer ad for the VW and it made them cry. But that was a longer ad. Are you seeing any changes in terms of how long the TV ads tend to be? Anything on that point?
Yeah, it's an interesting phenomenon. I think especially around the Super Bowl specifically, it's super expensive to buy an ad in the Super Bowl, right? So what brands do, because they do invest so much in the development of that creative, is they'll create kind of a long form spot and hope that kind of picks up and goes viral online, which is probably exactly what our client mentioned watching. So that's a great way to kind of re-engage that consumer a little bit more with either a second touch point, but also kind of drawing that relationship a little bit deeper. That's something that we see a lot in the Super Bowl that can add a lot of value.
Lovely, thank you very much, and thank you to all of our presenters for bringing this long form piece together. If you want to watch it again in short segments or the whole show, you can after tomorrow. We'll be sending that to you, and all of the material, including the links to the reports we've been referencing, will be there for you. We hope you'll also be with us again in a couple of months' time. We're thinking about a big topic. All our organisations we're working for, probably on this call, are thinking about ESG and wondering whether we're making enough progress. So we'll be back to tackle that topic head on the 25th of April. But for now, thank you for being with us. Thank you for our presenters, and we'll see you all again very soon. All the best.